Back when I was a kid, terrorism was not on our mind. We just didn't think about it. It was the 80s. America was great. We were protected. We were safe here. The only thing I remember about terrorism when I was a kid is watching the movie Back to the Future, and they had the van that was chasing them, and they said, "It's the Libyans, the terrorists," and that's it in the movies one time. Nowadays, terrorism seems to be prevalent everywhere. It's a huge issue. It's always on our mind. We're always concerned about our safety here in this country. How did that happen? Our next episode today deals with terrorism. Geopod is where we look at current events through the lens of geospatial analysis. We have some great voices around the table. I'm Andrew Patterson, a teacher here at Coppell High School. Who else do we have that's going to be lending their voice?
I'm Sai.
I'm Christopher.
I'm Veronica.
I'm Jia.
I'm Bilal.
And I'm Nihar.
So as Americans, when we first think of the word terrorism, I'm sure all of us immediately think about 9/11. That's something not only are we taught in school about, but we've seen the horrific videos. We've seen these deadly terrorist attacks, whether it's through old news clippings or just, revelations from our parents about what they were doing that day. I feel like that day is considered a turning point in our history, just in terms of, even though we are the most dominant country in the world, we still can be under attack at any time. But a lot of people misinterpret what happened on that day. They think that, terrorism just started that day, and that's when this conflict started arising. America had nothing to do with it. But if you look at the history before that, back during the Cold War, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, we secretly, and not always covertly, but mostly secretly, were training this Afghan small militias and radical groups to go fight off against the Russians, mainly because it's a Cold War, but we didn't get involved in the Cold War. We mostly just facilitated other countries to fight off against it. And during this process, as we put our hands in the Middle East, we tainted with their core values. In the Middle East, mostly Islamic countries, their views of Western civilization are mostly negative, because in their doctrines, they are against gay marriage. They're against, all the rights we have. It's prohibited. So this influence that we put on these different people that were fighting off against the Russians sort of created this idea of terrorism, and especially modern terrorism, specifically Al-Qaeda. We even used the help of Osama bin Laden to fight off against the Soviets. So in turn, as our influence on these Middle Eastern countries continued, we created the terrorists that we see today. Sai, any thoughts?
So, as Bilal said, the influence of terrorism extends from before 9/11 through the invasion of Afghanistan and the American military supplying arms to what would become the forces of the Taliban. And we also see that terrorism, it's unique in world history and American history because it itself is a force that's scattered throughout the world. It's not a concrete army unit. It's an ideology. It's not a nationalistic organization. It's a fragmented system that employs the use of united forces throughout the world.
You're right, Sai. I think the biggest thing about terrorism is that it's not a country. We're not fighting against Korea. We're not fighting against Vietnam. We're fighting against an idea. We're fighting against a doctrine. We're fighting against beliefs of a group of people that are spread across the whole earth. So my question is, and this can be for anyone around us, how big of a problem is terrorism to us as individuals and to us as a country?
I think terrorism has an effect on individuals, not in the way of where an actual terrorist attack potentially, but the way that terrorism shifts our view of people, especially after 9/11, the view of people who are, Middle Eastern. It creates a lot of anti-Islamic sentiment in America because it was an Islamic radical group that attacked the Twin Towers, and I think that has a lot of negative effects, and it also adds on to a lot of negative stereotypes of people who just happened to be of the same ethnic group as the people who attacked us on 9/11, but didn't even do anything or weren't even involved. And I think that's something that we didn't see before 9/11, but now is becoming increasingly prevalent in today's society.
All right, so with the whole thing on terrorism, I don't know. I think what we have to fear is not terrorism, but as some president said, that what we have to fear is fear itself. Yeah. Oh, Franklin. Okay. Awesome. Roosevelt. So Roosevelt said that. All right. Okay. And I believe that because honestly, we have this fear of people with different ideas and that they will come and they will their ideas will be superior to ours, and for some reason we will be inferior to them. And because of this fear, it drives us to things like war and wanting to overpower other people and things like terrorism. So if anything, I would fear for our inability to understand others and understand that there can be two completely opposing ideologies and that they can peacefully coexist as long as they don't act upon it in a negative fashion.
I think that's right. We have this whole idea that really developed in the late 20th century of spreading democracy, as George W. Bush said, planting the seed of democracy, whether it was in Afghanistan or whether it was in Iraq. We were trying to implement democracy in these terrorist-filled nations. When you look at these groups, currently we're not mostly focused on Al-Qaeda, where most of the news is covering ISIS. ISIS knows, and I'm not a terrorist, none of us are terrorists, but you can see, and logically, these organizations know that they cannot take down America's army. It's obvious. America, we spend more on our military than anyone, and if we want to, we can go blow up any nation on the globe if, we so desired it. What these terrorist groups want is to spread fear. They know that they can't break the system from the outside because they will be crushed by our military. But if they infiltrate our minds, if they create this fear that we have now of any time there being a radical terrorist attack, and if they've caused themselves to become the news, become the focus of what these political parties are discussing, become the focus of our military strategy, they've infiltrated our minds to the point where we fear them, even though they may not be harming us at all times. They've created this whole sense of fear that at any moment we can be attacked, or at any moment, these groups are radically just killing off people. And of course, it's really tragic to hear about all these attacks that occur every week, but in terms of what they're doing, their purpose is not to go attack the U.S. Army, or their whole purpose is not to destroy a country. Their purpose is to destroy the minds of the American people and destroy the minds of democratic people to show that they are the stronger individuals. Nihar, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, Bilal, I think you're right. The terrorist groups that are in the world today aren't really trying to take down America from the outside, like you said. They're more working from the inside. If you think about sleeper terrorists that are dormant in different countries, in various countries, it's really hard to take down these terrorists that we see in the world because, as Sai said, it's not one organization that we're fighting against. So I think that's what makes terrorism a much bigger problem in today's world than it was before, because in previous years, terrorist attacks weren't as common as they are now. Now, because of how often terrorist attacks occur, we've become disillusioned to the fact of terrorism.
So as Nihar was saying, the fear of imagining that there are terrorist sleeper cells throughout the nation, it reminds me of the Red Scare in the 1960s, when everyone thought there were communists everywhere in the state government, in the army, they've infiltrated the highest levels of government. And what this makes me feel is that the terrorists, they're only amplifying their effect throughout the nation by making us imagine that there are immense amounts of terrorists, immense numbers, when in fact there's only a small population of terrorists that are just trying to use fear as a weapon. And as fear is the greatest weapon, it's been used effectively throughout the world. This is having a large impact on it. It's become a huge issue in politics, in world politics, and it's influenced the world.
Going off of Sai said, he's right, and especially I think terrorists are especially successful now, especially with the media coverage of terrorist attacks, especially on like European countries like Paris and like Belgium, and that kind of rallies, people within like America and in Europe against it, and people get a lot of attention, and these issues are talked about a lot. And even with the attacks that are happening in the Middle East, to like the attacks in Turkey, the media covers them, maybe not as much, but there's still coverage about it, and we get that exposure to the fact that these terrorists are attacking cities within the world, and that kind of brings to attention and makes it seem like while there might not be as many, the way the media portrays it makes it seem like it's extremely prevalent in today's society.
So this question is directed towards Mr. Patterson. We've seen over the past decade and a half us getting more involved in these Middle Eastern countries, whether it's through Afghanistan or Iraq or, the tragic Libya. And each time we've done that, we've had an impetus for it because, we have these leaders, Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, that are essentially terrorizing their own people, whether, it's through violent means or, through using the military against their own people, and we go and support these people and overthrow these governments and try to establish democracy. And each time we've done it, it's failed. That's why it's such a big deal in Syria right now, because if we overthrow Assad, we're just going to create the same mess that we have in Libya, where we can't establish a democracy properly because of all these different factions that are aroused. Yet, a strong number of people believe we need to get involved militarily, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to fight off against these terrorists, and innocent people are dying. So what do you think is the right strategy, either militarily, or how should America help these nations where these problems are occurring?
Well, unfortunately, I think that we've got ourselves into a situation that cannot easily be ended. After 9/11, we went into Afghanistan, and I think the world was behind us for the most part, because that's perceived the region where terrorist cells were hiding and being funded and created. But then it didn't stop there. We continued, and we went into the Saddam Hussein's territory, Iraq, because we said he had weapons of mass destruction. Well, it turns out he didn't. And it just continues from there. So what was stirred up in the Middle East after 9/11 just continued. And it wasn't just a situation where we eradicated the problem, we stayed. And every time we go into another country, we propagate exactly what you said, Bilal, where we say we're going to set up democracy and we're going to rid the world of terrorism, and yet it seems to create more turmoil and more terrorism. So do we want our country to be safe? I think all of us do. But the strategy we're going about it seems to be stirring up more trouble. The question I have to ask is, was the end result really to create democracy and safety? Because the end result I'm seeing is more chaos. You look at what you do in any situation. Who profits the most? And what I see is American corporations and financial institutions that profit from war, the creation of ammo, tanks, planes, oil, and all of us are caught in the middle. That's my observation. We got into these wars not to end terrorism, but to continually be at war, to fund the military-industrial complex.
Mr. Patterson, you brought up a great point about this whole idea of, did we really want to spread democracy? You just think about our own history. When we declared war against Britain and we established the Declaration of Independence and eventually won the war, how long did it take for democracy to actually work? With the Articles of Confederation, we had this turmoil where we had these people backlashing against us, and it took, I would argue over a century for democracy to really work, because over the issues of slavery, over the issues of sectional tension, states' rights versus federal rights, even though they may continue today, they were a big problem then, and I don't think the idea of democracy was really, well-rounded until, the 1800s. It took so long for us to develop that as a nation, and we're expecting these countries in the Middle East to all of a sudden become democratic after years of, tyrannical rule. I just don't think that's how it works. And when we get involved in these countries, before this whole ISIS thing started, we had Saddam Hussein ruling, and even though he was a terrible dictator, he was ruthless, brutal to his people, this whole idea of there being terrorists didn't really spark there until after we overthrew him. We switched the denominations of Muslims, and then we started seeing people protesting against the new governments, formulating this idea of ISIS. So by getting involved, we actually created the terrorists that we're fighting today. And I think you're right. We're gonna continue struggling with this for the next decades. What's the solution in the Middle East? Do we get involved? Do we back off now and just, wait it out, see what's going to happen? Or do we continue our policy of, trying to fix Syria and potentially creating even more terrorists? Any of you guys have any final thoughts?
So it's kind of interesting how governments have tried to stop terrorism following 9/11. And one example is the UK in 2005 put forth the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And the government is trying to protect their citizens as best as they possibly can. So they're trying to make sure that at all times their people are doing normal things. Maybe they're going too far with what they're trying to do, but at the same time, this could be good because their country would be safe.
Thank you guys so much for listening to our podcast throughout this year, specifically this episode. Have a good day. This episode, 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 have a good day.